Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to gather to worship, to just say thank you for all of the amazing ways that you love us, take care of us, and provide for us. And Lord, we also just want to thank you for the opportunity to hear from you. We just ask that your Spirit would fall fresh in this place this morning, that we would hear directly from you through your word, through your Spirit this morning. When we didn't come seeking information, we came seeking transformation. Our prayers that not one person will leave the same way they came in. We just thank you, Lord, for all of the other churches around town, around the country, around the globe that are preaching the gospel this weekend. We just pray that the life-giving message of the cross would go out with clarity and conviction, that you'd use it to draw people into an eternal relationship with you. And we thank you and we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I don't know if you remember this movie, Uncle Buck. I'm kind of aging myself because it was kind of an old movie. But in the movie, it was Macaulay Culkin and John Candy, and Macaulay Culkin and his sisters or his sister and brother, like their parents had to go away for an emergency. So Uncle Buck came to babysit. And so one of the first scenes is John Candy sitting at the kitchen table with Macaulay Culkin, and he's just asking him, like grilling him with questions. And finally, John Candy was like, "What's your record for consecutive questions asked?" And then he follows it up with, "Why do you ask so many questions?" And Macaulay Culkin says, "Well, I'm a kid, that's my job." And I don't know if you've had kids or been around kids, but I can verify for you that this is very true. My kids ask me millions of questions, all day long with the questions. It's never annoying, not at all, not ever. But they ask so many questions, and one day I started to ask myself, why are they so full of questions? And I realized that there's several different reasons. Some of the times they're just curious. So they say things like, "Does God have ear hair?" Or, "Why are you eating that?" Or my favorite, "Where do babies come from?" I'll answer that one when you're older. But they ask questions because they're curious. And they just want to know about life and their world and their environment, and they ask questions to get answers so they can make sense of their world. Other times they ask questions because they want to know how things work. My 8-year-old was at the doctor's recently with my wife. And the doctor said something to her about, "Well, pretty soon you're going to be going through puberty." And my 8-year-old was like, "Puberty? What's puberty?" So for the 30 minutes in the car, she was grilling my wife with questions. And then she gets home, and she's asking me questions about her menstrual cycle and pubic hair and her boobs growing. And I'm just like, "Listen, honey, I love you, but I grew up in a house where we don't talk about these things with your parents. And I also grew up in an environment where we don't say things like pubic hair in church, so if that was scandalous to you, I apologize for that as well." But I've learned that I have to be present with her in those questions because she's just trying to figure out how things work for her. And I have to be open and present with her because God has given me her to help guide her through all of these seasons of life. We have a blended family, so we have 2 older kids. And then we have 2 younger kids, and the older kids, we share custody, so they're in and out. And my 18-year-old just graduated high school. She's starting her own life. She's in college. She has a boyfriend, so she doesn't come through as regularly as she used to. But man, you should see those girls light up when she walks through the door. It's such a blessing. But they're still trying to even figure out that. My son is 15, and every time he comes, my youngest absolutely loves him. He's just such a big goofball, and he plays with her, and he's silly, and they just have the most amazing time. And it's funny for me to watch it develop because I remember when he was 7 and we brought our 8-year-old home for the first time, and he was so excited, and he just wanted to play with her. And he was so excited, and then I could see his face starting to change. And he looks at me, he's like, "Is she going to do anything, or is she just going to sit there?" But he just wanted to play with her. And now they're 8 and 6, and they just love each other, and he's so good with them. But then he leaves, and my youngest doesn't understand why. And so she's asking questions about how life works, but she's also giving me insight into where she is. And that's the third reason why they ask questions. Because not only are they trying to figure it out, but they're revealing to us their feelings about what's going on. It's not fair that he has to leave. Why does he have to go? Why can't he just stay here with us? My favorite is always, "Why are you and his mom not married anymore?" And I'm like, that one's going to require a little bit of Jack Daniels and some therapy. But we'll get there eventually. So they're asking questions because they're curious, and they're asking questions because they want to know how life works, but they're also showing us where they are through the questions that they ask. They're confused, they're hurt, they're upset. And I've learned that I can't just dismiss their questions, because if I just dismiss their questions, I'm going to miss the opportunity to connect with them at a deeper level. And the thing about it is that our relationship with God needs to work the same way. We all have questions. There's questions that we have at different times in life. In this series, Dialogues with Destiny, Pastor Jonathan has been walking us through questions that God asks us, trying to lead us to a certain place, or open-ended questions that invite us to kind of reflect. And today we're going to kind of flip the script, and we're going to talk about the questions that we ask God, because we have to be curious about God. I remember when I was growing up and learning how to read the Bible, I learned that you read the Bible to arm yourself with facts when you get into debates. You either argue with people who aren't Christians so that you can argue them into the kingdom, or you can sit and you can have arguments with other Christians to argue them out of heresy. But what would change if we stopped approaching the Bible as if it was just a collection of facts for us to understand, and started asking questions that invited curiosity about who God is, about how to love each other better? What if we read the Bible with that same kind of sense of curiosity that our kids have? And sometimes we go to God and we have questions about how life works. Maybe you've asked these kinds of questions before. Why do good things happen to bad people? Or why do bad things happen to good people? When we ask these kinds of questions, we're inviting God to help us make sense of the world in which we live. And the truth is that sometimes our questions even open our hearts so that God can see where we're at with Him. I don't know if you've ever had an experience where you felt alone, abandoned by God, or angry at God, or disappointed with God. But the thing is that if you just put a lid on those questions, if you just put a lid on those feelings, you can never open yourself up to invite God to come in with healing and redemption and restoration. Because the simple fact of life is that there's going to be times in your life where nothing makes sense. Some of us will experience at this level, some of us will experience it here, but you're going to encounter something in your life when life won't make sense. For me, it's been the last 4 years of my life. And listen, I don't want this to be political. I don't want you to think that I'm talking bad about one party or the good about the other party. It's not political at all. I'm just sharing with you my experience of the last 4 years. I'm pretty convinced if Solomon were alive today, he would write a sequel to the book of Ecclesiastes. It would be called Ecclesiastes Volume 2, The COVID Years. Because what I learned growing up was that there's meaning in the construction and the social constructs of our country. That we elect people who pledge their oath to the Constitution to protect us, to help us, to support us. And what I realized the last few years is they don't care about us. Right? And how do I know that? Because none of them followed the rules they asked us to live by. They told you can't be out at dinner with your friends without a mask on. And I know you've seen the pictures of the governor at a restaurant with 12 of his closest friends, not a mask among them. The Speaker of the House was in San Francisco at a beauty salon that the governor said had to be closed down for COVID, yet she's there, you've seen the pictures, getting her hair done, not a mask in sight. And again, it's not one party or the other, because I heard a story about a Republican governor who closed interstate travel so that people couldn't come or go to stop the spread. And every other week, he was in Florida doing fishing trips. I realized that all of the things that I had come to believe and all of the meaning that I had invested in understanding how things work in my life, none of it was true. Everything started to fall apart. And it wasn't just the politicians. It was the scientists and the silly rules that they made us follow. I remember one time going into Stater Brothers, obviously looking for toilet paper, but they had like directions on the floor so that you come in and you had to go to the left and like around the produce section. And some aisles you could only walk from the back of the store to the front, while other aisles you had to walk from the front of the store to the back. As if COVID, this viral infection that's airborne, is also following the directions. So God forbid you walk up a down aisle because COVID's coming for you. It just makes no sense. When you get to the restaurant, you have to wear your mask, but once you get to your table, you can take it off. Like there's some kind of special bubble around your table protecting you from it. And how on earth is that $3 Hello Kitty mask with all of the gaps and places around where it's not tight, how is that going to stop you from contracting this disease? I went to Walmart one day, obviously for toilet paper. And I walked in and my wife had asked me to buy some dumbbells so we could work out at home. That section of the store was closed because we could only shop for essential items and dumbbells are non-essential. Because clearly this is where COVID's hanging out, right? Some of it was just silly and I'm like, how does this make any sense? And I just heard that there was a leading epidemiologist who was testifying in Capitol Hill. You remember the 6-foot rule? He was testifying and sharing all of the experimentation and how they tested like how far vapor could travel after you exhaled it. And this is how they meticulously came up with the 6-foot rule. Oh wait, he didn't say that at all. He actually said, well, it was just something we came up with. So like, how does any of this make sense? And I'm experiencing this world and everything that I thought I knew about how things worked and how viruses worked and how social constructs worked, none of it made any sense. It all fell apart around me. And I don't know if that's your experience, but that was mine. I looked at the world and I'm like, man, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. And the problem is that my life didn't stop while all of this was happening. My life didn't stop while all of this was happening. So as I'm trying to navigate all of this, we found out that my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So I'm traveling from California to Maine a couple times because my brother's there and it's only the two of us trying to care for my mom, so we're trying to figure out what's the best course of action. How can I make sure that she sees her grandkids one more time while she still remembers them? And I'm dealing with the fact that I literally was upstairs going to the restroom, and my mom asked my wife after we'd been there for 3 days, why didn't Scott come with you this time? And I'm trying to process all of this, and what does this mean, and how am I going to manage this? And we're also trying to figure out, should we sell the house? Should we try to get her in somewhere to an assisted living place? And I'm dealing with all of this at the same time. The last trip I was there in October, and I came home Wednesday night. Friday morning, I'm driving my kids to the dentist, and my engine dies. The first quote was $23,000. I still owed $19,000 on the car. Thankfully, my friend Tiffany connected me with somebody who charged me more than half of that. But I'm dealing with all of that too. And so I have gracious friends who let me borrow their cars while my car, I'm trying to figure out what to do. 3 cars I borrowed, every single one of them blew out a tire while I was driving it. One got a screw, one of them was just worn and needed to be replaced anyway. The third time, I was driving my wife's car to Murrieta to pick up my daughter who was visiting her boyfriend. It's pitch black out, and I hit the biggest pothole that you've ever seen in your life. And as soon as I hit it, I knew this was going to be bad news. So I'm sitting on the side of the road in this big dirt field in... I won't say what I was going to describe it as. But I'm out in the middle of this dirt field trying to figure out how to change this tire because for some reason, the tire jack in my wife's trunk is a piece of garbage. 2 hours later, I finally got the tire installed. And I'm sitting there, and all of this is going on in my life, and I'm just sitting there bawling and saying, God, where are you? Why are you allowing me to experience this? What is going on? Why have you abandoned me? What is the point? There is no point here. What is going on? And so all my understanding of life and how it worked was collapsing around me. Life had lost its meaning. And I've been fascinated by the Bible's wisdom literature for a long time. And I read one time that the book of Proverbs is kind of like wisdom for when life is normal. And so it kind of makes sense if you read it like that, because it talks about hard work versus laziness. And in an agricultural society, if you're not going to work hard, you're not going to eat. So if you're not going to plant the seeds and water the seeds and harvest the seeds and turn it into bread, you're going to die of starvation. So he says, listen, lazy people, if you're not willing to work hard, you're going to not eat. Life when life is normal. Wisdom for when life is normal. What happens during famine season? It doesn't matter how hard you work, because you're still not going to eat, because there's going to be no rain. So Proverbs is wisdom for when life is normal. So then we come to Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is a train wreck. Anybody ever read Ecclesiastes? Like 3 of you. I have never heard anybody preach on it, and I've been fascinated with it for so long. I had a teacher in college suggest that Solomon was syphilitic because he had 600 wives, 300 concubines, and if you know anything about the long-term effects of syphilis, it can make you crazy. So my professor told us that the author of Ecclesiastes had lost his mind, and it makes kind of sense. It makes some sense. I don't think that's what's happening in Ecclesiastes, but it's an interesting observation because it's just pessimistic. It seems like there's no hope. Even the very first things that he writes in the book of Ecclesiastes kind of hit you right in the face. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What does that mean? You might have a translation where it says meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. And I look at this and I think, how could Solomon get to this place? He had a charmed life. He grew up in the palace, the son of the king. I can't imagine he ever lacked for anything. And yet here he is, and the first thing he says is that everything is meaningless. And I wonder, have you ever reached that point in your life? At some degree or another, have you ever looked at life and said, I can't find meaning in this circumstance? I know a lot of your stories, and I know some of you have experienced that at a high level, that some of you experienced that at a less intense level, but I know you've experienced it because it's part of life. There's times when things don't make sense. And so what is Solomon getting at? The language that he uses, vanity, vanity, it kind of has the connotation of that life is like a vapor, that it's fleeting. So anybody ever lived in cold environments and you breathe out, you exhale, and what happens? The warm air from inside your body hits the cold air outside of your body, and you can see your breath. I know this is a very non-scientific way of describing this, but you know what I'm saying. The hot air hits the cold air, and you see it. And what happens after a few seconds? It dissipates. It's gone, because the temperature has dropped so that the air that was inside of you is now the same temperature as the air that's outside of you. And this is what Solomon is saying. And it's not just that life is like a blink, because the Bible says that in other places, but theologically what he's saying is that life is pointless simply because it's here and then it's gone. And as he goes through the book of Ecclesiastes, he shares other reasons why he's come to the same conclusion. He worked his whole life to build wealth and a kingdom and all of these things, and as soon as he dies, he knows that someone else is going to take what he worked so hard for. It's meaningless. And so Solomon does what most of us will do when we find ourselves in these sets of circumstances. He starts by asking questions. The first question he asks is in verse 3. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? And I'll be completely honest with you. This is a really odd question to ask when you've come to this conclusion. I mean, I've asked this question. I've had dead-end jobs. I've had jobs that I've hated. I've had jobs that don't pay the bills. And I've said to myself, what is the point of all of this hard work if none of it's paying off? But I'll be honest, I've never come to a place in my life where I felt like all of the meaning that I thought was attached to my understanding of reality has collapsed around me, and the first place my mind goes is to my employment status. Okay, so my brother just called, and his 2-year-old has been diagnosed with terminal cancer. God, I hate my job. Why am I here? I never go there. But that's not what Solomon is inviting us to see. What he's asking is a profoundly deep theological question. You go back to Genesis 1, and Genesis 1, there's nothing except for God, and God says he creates the heavens and earth out of nothing, and that it's without form and void. And the Genesis 1 unpacks the 6 days of creation, how God takes what was empty and fills it, and he takes what was without shape and shapes it. And every day, what does God say about what he created? He says it's good. And he sets up this place for Adam and Eve to come and live so that they might be in close proximity to him and live in relationship with him. And he says, enjoy all of it. He gives them a job. They're naked and unashamed. I've been trying for years to have Garden of Eden Day at my house, and my wife just won't buy into it. But imagine how life is like for them. It's great. It's abundant. They're with God. And he says, one rule, don't eat from that tree. And so what do? They ate from that tree. And so in Genesis 3, we find out the consequences. Genesis 3, 17 through 19. To Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, I'd like to pause there because I think there's a lot of lessons, valuable lessons for married guys in the sentence, but unfortunately we don't have time. Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So here's what Genesis is saying, is that God created it, you spoiled it. And now, instead of enjoying your purpose, living out the amazing jobs that God has given you to be fruitful and multiply, to have dominion over everything, instead of enjoying that life, now you're going to eat bread by the sweat of your brow, by the hard toil of your broken hands. So they've gone from a place where they're living with God in abundance. Now they're going to have to work for everything they have. The toil that Solomon is talking about is a consequence of their bad choice in Garden of Eden. This is the life that Solomon has been born into. But Solomon doubles down and he ratchets up the criticism, because not only is he saying, God, listen, this is the world that I've inherited, but he also says, this is the world that you created. This is the world that you made. Ecclesiastes 1, 4 through 11. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things, yet to be among those who come after. So here's what he's saying, is that Adam and Eve took something that was beautiful and they exchanged it for this meaningless cycle of toil. And it's not that he's just saying, listen, it's going to be hard for you to eat. If you want bread, you're going to have to gain it by the sweat of your brow. He's saying that this is the cycle that you've inherited because of your choice. Because what is true about harvest time is that it happens every single year. So now, Adam, because you listen to the voice of your wife, your life is going to be this vicious cycle from which you can never get off. Because you're going to reap this fall, you're going to turn it into bread, you're going to eat this winter, and then you're going to go plant seeds again. And you're going to be right back into the cycle of hard work by the sweat of your brow, because next year when you reap and you turn it into bread, you're going to start right back at the beginning. And Solomon is saying it's not just that. This is the way that God created everything. What does he say? The sun comes up and races around the sky, only to return to where it started, so that it can go back around to return to where he started, so that it can come back around to go where it started. What happens with the rain? It comes down, it's collected in streams, it runs to the ocean, but the ocean is never filled because the water evaporates, goes back up in the sky. Once it gets there, it comes back down and repeats the cycle. Solomon is looking at life as if it's the movie Groundhog's Day. Every day he wakes up, the alarm's going off, he's in the same day, he's living the same day, day after day after day. Solomon is looking at the cycles of life, and he's saying, listen, it's so redundant. Everything is the same. Nothing changes. And so here's your choice, is that the cycles were built to support you. You look at your life, and you identify what season you're in. It allows you to prepare for the next season. When you get to fall and you're enjoying the harvest, you know that winter comes next. So you can prepare. My aunts and uncles used to do like jarred fruits and preserves because they knew that if they didn't preserve it, they were going to have to throw it away and they'd be hungry when winter came. God wove this into creation too. Genesis 1, why does it say that he put the stars in the sky, the sun rules by day and the moon by night? To keep track of the seasons so that you can be prepared when the next season comes. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. What season are you in so that you can be preparing for what's next? The problem is when we lose sight of God because something bad has happened in our life. Now the seasons aren't helping us or supporting us or guiding us. They're crushing us under the weight of their absolute redundancy. And so life is always this big hamster wheel that we can never get off. I mean, we talk about it in our language, right? How you living? I'm just, stuck in the rat race. It's become part of the way that we talk about life. Because we can either look at the seasons and help them, use them to help us guide our way, or we can allow them to evaporate the meaning from our lives. And this seems to be where Solomon is stuck. So the first point this morning is that the meaningless of life is experienced in the perceived absence of God. The meaningless of life is experienced in the perceived absence of God. The whole Bible is a record of God's relational presence with his people. It starts out in the very beginning. As we already mentioned, Genesis 1. Why did God create the Garden of Eden? So that he could put man there and give man his purpose and his mission, but also so that he could come and walk with them in the cool of the day. Garden of Eden was designed for you and I to live with God. And so what happened when Adam and Eve sinned? They got kicked out. And so then, years later, the family finds themselves in Egypt. And God calls them out of Egypt and sends them to the land that he promised Abraham. And along the way, what does God say to Moses? Build a tent, put it in the center of your camp, and I will reside with you in the tent. And then they get to the promised land, and King David is ruling over Israel, and he has this epiphany, and he says to God, God, why is it that I live in this beautiful palace while you still live in a tent? So God allows Solomon to build a temple. And I think sometimes we get stuck thinking of the temple in very Western ways. Because one Sunday we come to church, and we have church, and we go home. But what's different about it is that the temple wasn't just church. It wasn't just where they went to offer their sacrifices or sing hymns to God or to pilgrimage to during different seasons of the year. The temple was actually the place where God lived with his people. And there's a much bigger spirituality going on in that because they felt that the temple was actually an interdimensional portal which literally connected heaven with earth. This is where God was. And so it's not just a place that they went or something that they did. His presence gave meaning and ordered their lives. It gave meaning and ordered their lives. And so Solomon passes away, and his children fight for the throne, and now there's 2 kingdoms in Israel. And if you've read the stories, it's insane, this period of Israel's life. There's some kings that come and they help the people worship, and they institute the law that they've kind of forgotten about, and Israel's enjoying peace and prosperity because they have kings who are leading them into right relationship with God. And then they have kings that lead them in the opposite direction. So finally God's had enough. And so he allows the Assyrians to come take the northern kingdom, and then in 586, he allows the Babylonians to come and take the southern kingdom. And war for us has become, I don't want to say domesticated, but it's definitely become politicized. I mean, you turn on your TV, and you can see camera shots of missiles going from Russia to Ukraine or going back into Russia. And we've turned that into a political conversation. The same thing is happening with everything that's going on in the Middle East right now. But war didn't function like that in the Old Testament. Certainly there were political elements, but the battles were more theological. They were spiritual contests between gods. So if your army went to their country and you beat them, it was a sign that your God was more powerful than theirs. So here come the Babylonians. And they come into Jerusalem and they destroy the city. It's not political. They've just destroyed the place where heaven is connected to earth. And in the process have started to collapse all of the meaning that the Israelites have attached to their understanding of reality and how the world works. And then they take some of the Israelites out of the land that God had given them, promised to them to live in and experience peace and prosperity. He takes some of those Israelites and exiles them off to Babylon. And a whole another edifice of meaning has collapsed for the people. And then he goes and destroys the temple and takes away some of the sanctified artifacts and takes them back to Babylon. And I need you to understand that this changes everything for the Israelites. Everything that they've used to construct meaning in their life has literally been demolished and turned into rubble. The prophet Isaiah in chapters 24 through 27 describes this as creation going backwards from what was once ordered and now it's formless and void again. The prophet Ezekiel talks about how God has evacuated the temple. His presence has left the people before the Babylonians came. And I'm guessing that you've probably found yourself in a circumstance in which you can relate to that. A time when all of the ways that you've invested your understanding of meaning, that God has given me finances and now they're broken. God has given me a husband and now he's been taken away. God has been giving me children and I just found out that those children are going to be taken away also. Where in your life have you experienced the collapse of God's presence in your life? Where have you felt the sting of feeling that he was no longer there? Where are those moments where you've come to the place where you've looked at life and said, there is no meaning? Because I know that you've experienced them. And I bet they're connected to you feeling like God has abandoned you. It's interesting to me that In the English Bible, Ecclesiastes is followed by Isaiah. In the Hebrew Bible, Ecclesiastes is followed by Lamentations. And I believe that the Hebrew Bible is trying to get us to connect Solomon's sense of meaninglessness with the destruction of the temple. So in Lamentations, we read this. And I want you to listen to it within the framework of God's absence and the collapse of meaning for his people. The Lord has become like an enemy. I mean, just pause right there. What have you learned about God in your life? That he's your friend, he's Abba Father, he's your shepherd, he's your protector. Jeremiah says he's become like an enemy. He swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all its palaces. He has laid in ruins its strongholds, and he has multiplied in the daughter of Judah mourning and lamentation. He has laid waste his booth like a garden, laid in ruins his meeting place. The Lord has made Zion forget festival and Sabbath, and in his fierce indignation has spurned king and priest. The Lord has scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary. He has delivered into the hand of the enemy the walls of her palaces. They raised a clamor in the house of the Lord as on the day of the festival. So now you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out, how on earth am I going to continue after this moment? And now the prophets are telling you that not only is it your fault that you're in the situation, but God has absolutely turned his back to you. So life makes no sense. Finances make no sense. Health makes no sense. Relationship makes no sense. Nothing makes sense anymore because everything that made it make sense in the first place has absolutely collapsed around you. How do you function other than to say everything is meaningless? And Ecclesiastes invites us to experience that, because the truth is that at some point we all feel it, that nothing makes sense. But there's hope. The second point this morning is that wisdom is the resource God has given us to navigate this crazy world. Wisdom is the resource God has given us to navigate this crazy world. Again, I told you that I grew up learning how to read the Bible as if it was just a collection of facts. I've had systematic theology courses, and I've been taught that the systematic theologian takes the facts of the Bible and arranges them systematically or topically according to the whole body of the Bible. So if you want to know what the Bible says about justification, it shows you all the list of places where the Bible talks about it and what it means. It's a helpful tool to be sure, but I'm not going to lie to you. When I was sitting on the road in Hemet with a flat tire, wondering where God was, I didn't run home and go to my bookshelf and pull out Wayne Grudem's 800-page systematic theology, because facts are not helpful all the time. What I needed was guidance. What I needed was a help in navigating the circumstances that I was facing. And praise God, as a man who doesn't like to ask for directions, I'm thankful that we live in the age of the GPS. And I don't know if you remember back in the day before smartphones, but it was a challenge to get anywhere. I remember I was 15 years old, I just got my driver's license, and my ears were like sonar. And like every time I'd heard somebody in my house say like, oh, I need to go to the bank to drop off this check, or I need to the grocery store to get some milk, or I need to go to the post office and get stamps, I was like already in the kitchen with the keys in my hand. I'll go. So one day my mom asked me to go to the grocery store. And I grabbed her list and I grabbed the keys and I ran out to the car. I was so excited to drive there by myself. And I get in and I sit down and I'm like, I have no idea how to get there. Because I've been there 1,000 times, but I was always in the back seat not paying attention. And isn't this how we start out with God? Because we walk with God at the beginning and we're so enamored by his love story and how much he loves us and he sent Christ to die for us that we're just kind of not even paying attention to how it works in life. And so then I got ready to go to college. And I was living in Portland, Maine, and I was going to college in Philadelphia, so I went down to the AAA and got a triptych. This is like the second evolution of navigation. Has anybody ever used one? Anybody ever have fun using one? It was miserable. So if you think about a map of the East Coast, like a map, all the highways and whatever, a triptych condenses that down into a convenient handheld flip book. So as you're driving, you're trying to flip the pages so that you don't get lost or kill somebody along the way. And from Portland to Philadelphia, my triptych was like 842 pages. And I'm like, this is miserable. But I got there. It helped me navigate the journey from my home to where I was going to school. And then the internet was invented, and we had MapQuest. The problem was that we didn't have a cable that would run from the house to the car, so we either had to print off the MapQuest directions, or if you were poor like me, you had to handwrite them on a separate piece of paper that you kept on the passenger seat so that you could figure out where you're going. And then one day I rolled the windows down in the car, and there goes my MapQuest print off. Thankfully, we don't live in that age anymore because now we have Waze and Google Maps. And here's the thing, is that the Bible wants to be your Waze app. The Bible assumes that you're going to go through experiences that you're not going to know how to navigate through them. You're going to encounter things that you're not going to be able to make sense of. You're going to see things in your life, and you're just going to look at God and be like, dude, what's up? Everything is meaningless. Where are you? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? What is going on? And here's the beautiful thing about God, is that he's full of grace. He's full of grace. He didn't give us a book of facts. He gave us a book of wisdom. And so here at the very beginning, Adam and Eve said, no, we're not going to follow your rules. We're going to fall and plunge humanity into sin. And God's so gracious that he says, that's okay, I got you. He sends Jesus. But here's the thing that's amazing to me. And this is double grace, maybe even triple grace. God also knows that the reason why you and I have difficulty navigating life is because he understands that this is not how he designed life to be in the first place. He wanted life to be Eden. He wanted life to be easy. He wanted life to be abundant. He wanted life to be our close proximity in relation to him. And when we took the bite of the apple, all of that was lost. And now we find ourselves in experiences where nothing makes sense and we don't know how to move forward through them. And so God says, that's okay. You made the mess. Here's the solution. God looked at a situation that we created for ourselves and says, I don't want you to be stuck there either, so I'm going to give you this book full of wisdom to help you navigate it. In this book, you are going to find people who went through things that you are now going through. In this book, you are going to find teachings from these people who are going to help give you the tools to navigate life. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you feel like nothing makes sense, that everything is meaningless, you can, yes, ask God the questions. Yes, you can ask God to come in and heal you. You can also go to his word because he's filled this book with tools to help navigate you from the one place where you're stuck to the next place where he wants to get you. Wisdom is the resource that God has given us to navigate life. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 1:12, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and in Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out wisdom by all that is done there. And so it's worth asking, if Solomon is the wisest person who has ever lived, and if Solomon was responsible for collecting all of these proverbs and was responsible for giving us all of these tools of navigation, how is it that Solomon gets to the place where he still can't make sense of the life in which he lived? What was going on? Why the disconnect? What is the book of Ecclesiastes? Third point this morning is that wisdom is intended to bring us to God, not replace him. Wisdom is intended to bring us to God, not replace him. So Solomon in 1 Kings 3 has this dream, and God shows up and says, "What is it that you want?" And he's impressed because Solomon doesn't ask for money. He doesn't ask for things that will make his life more comfortable. He asks for wisdom so that he could effectively lead the people of God. And I would like to suggest that if Proverbs is wisdom for life when it's normal, Ecclesiastes isn't the opposite of that. It's not wisdom for when life doesn't make sense. Ecclesiastes is Solomon's lament. It's Solomon's lament. It's when he finally realizes that the wisdom that God had given him was able to take him so far in understanding life and God and how it all works together. But it only took him so far. There were still gaps in his understanding. There were still gaps in his wisdom. There was still something beyond that threshold that he couldn't get past, that wisdom wasn't able to bring him into. And so here's Solomon, and he said, "God, you gave me all of this wisdom, and yet I still can't make sense of any of it. I don't understand why all of the toil. I don't understand why I've worked so hard to accumulate these things. I don't understand why I've given my life as an act of service, and yet I'm going to die at some point. And that day, the day that I die, somebody else who didn't work for any of this is going to come in around after I die, and he's going to take everything that I've worked for." Solomon understands that life makes no sense, and the problem for Solomon is that he thought wisdom was the solution. The wisdom is designed to bring you to God. It's not ever intended to replace him. And so where do we get stuck? Where do we get stuck? I would be willing to bet if you would ask yourselves these same kinds of questions, you would find where your idols are. You would find where your own idols are. For Solomon, his wisdom became his idol. It took God's place. I consider myself kind of a dummy, so I don't think wisdom is my idol, but I know I have them. You become what you worship. And so Solomon has become a fool because he worshiped his own wisdom. The tools, the resources, the things that God has given us are never intended to replace him. They're always intended to bring us to him. Let's go back to Ecclesiastes 1, 12 through 18. "I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to search out wisdom, all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with." Again, I read some of this stuff and it's profound to me. But again, here's Solomon, and his conclusion is that it's an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. "I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity, striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who are over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after the wind." Things were going great until they weren't. And Solomon had a complete breakdown because the thing that he was chasing was not God. The thing that he was chasing was something God had given as a gift to help him navigate life and to teach us how to navigate life as well. And so when you get stuck, I invite you to ask you, where are the things that are leading me away from God? What are the things that I think can do a better job than God of guiding me through this season of life? The last point this morning is that God has created windows into recovering meaning. God has created windows into recovering meaning. I've never been to jail, except for that one time. That's a story for another conversation. But I forget my nephew's here, so I should be careful. Anyway, I think it's interesting because I think what Solomon is doing is he's kind of describing his life as a conceptual prison. This is the place that he's stuck. Everything is meaningless isn't just some kind of empty theological saying that he deposits for us to reflect on. This is where he's living. He's living in a conceptual prison of his own making. He's trapped by it. He's stuck in it. And isn't it true for us that we get stuck in our own conceptual prisons? When the bad news comes in, we go right back into jail. When the thing happens that we can't wrap our head around, we go right back into prison. And what Solomon is doing in Ecclesiastes is brilliant to me. Not only is he suggesting that the wisdom can only make sense of so much of it, but from inside the prison that he's constructed, he's given us these little windows through which we can look out and start to recover meaning again. There's 5 of them, I think, at least 5 of them in the book. One of them happens in Ecclesiastes 4, verses 7 through 12. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This is also a vanity and an unhappy business. So let's pause right there. Again, he's talking about relationship in terms of its meaninglessness. Only he's not talking about the problem of having friends, because I think that's sometimes where we get stuck. Relationships can be messy. Family relationships can be messy. Personal friendships can be messy. Business relationships can be messy. But Solomon doesn't point to any of those things and suggest that they are the problem. The problem is when you're alone. And it goes right back again to the book of Genesis. Because God creates Adam, and what does he say? It's not good for man to be alone. So Solomon's looking at human relationships, and he says, even this is vanity. And it's cast in the same language of all of this negativity, all of this pessimism. It's the isolation which robs you of meaning. Isolation is part of his conceptual prison that makes him feel like everything is meaningless. But then I want you to notice how the tone changes. 2 are better than 1. Think about that. If we could spend all day unpacking the book of Ecclesiastes, it's probably not the first time he says something positive. But listen to how the tone changes. Being alone is meaningless, but being together is better. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. Again, it's a reward. Everything to this point that we've read has been about how it's meaningless. And now he talks about how friendship has a reward. What's the reward? If they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone together when he falls and has not another to lift him up. It's amazing to me. Like, I'm one of the most introverted people that you'll ever meet. And because of the way that I was raised by my parents, one of the early messages that I learned from them, not that they taught me, I just want to be very clear. They didn't teach me this. I learned from them, is that if I ever have a problem, the only response is to shut down. Because if I responded in a certain way, it might make him more angry. If I responded in a certain way, it might make her feel worthless. And I didn't want either of my parents to ever feel that way, so I shut down. And guess what happens in my life now when I'm in these cycles where nothing makes sense, where everything is just going around, it's just being crushed under the redundancy of life? I shut down. And it helps no one. Doesn't help me, doesn't help my wife, doesn't help my kids, doesn't help my friends. It helps no one. I've had to learn that there's good reward because two are better than one. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can you keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. And if two are good, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So here's the deal. Life, your life, is meaningless. It's not, and that's the ironic part. But there's going to be times that you're going to experience the tragedy, the heartbreak, the pain, the misery, the senselessness that life can sometimes be. Because that is part of the human condition. That is part of the consequences of Adam and Eve's decision in the garden. That is unfortunately part of the life that we now live on this earth, even though it was never the way that God intended it to be. But there's good news in all of it. Is that even within this creation, even within our experiences of it, there's places where God says, listen, I know that it's hard. I know that it's messy. I know that it's painful. I know that you feel like nothing makes sense. I know that you feel like everything is meaningless. But also, in the same creation, God has given us things through which we can experience redemption. He has given us things through which we can experience restoration. He has given us things through which we can find meaning. And so when you feel meaningless, your relationships with your family, with your friends, with God, are just one little piece of the restoration and redemption that are yours through a relationship with God. Even when it's the most bleak or the darkest, when you find yourself trapped within whatever conceptual prison you've created for yourself, when you join Solomon's chorus that everything is meaningless, that nothing has meaning, when God has left the building, remember two things. God has given you the means to navigate through it, and He's given you redemption to rise above it.